This is the Picard podcast on TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about episode 2 of Star Trek Picard, Maps and Legends. Welcome back, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about the second episode of Star Trek Picard, Maps and Legends. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Trekkies. I am one of your other hosts, John.
And rounding out the group, I'm Chris.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes.
Indeed, yes. Welcome back, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers, however you want to be called. Yes, Maps and Legends. I like the legends, I have to say, in this episode, but we will get into that in our spoiler-filled review.
I thought as a doctor of geography you'd be much more likely to like the maps, John.
Well, maybe, but I like the legends, certainly the Romulan legends. That was pretty cool, but yes, we will get into that into the spoiler-filled review.
We certainly will, yeah. Before we get into our discussion about this episode, we are going to talk about feedback on episode 1. As we said last time, we are recording these episodes before they come out. Seems to be really positive feedback overall about the first episode. Almost everybody I talked to has at least watched the episode. It seems to be kind of this cultural zeitgeist where everybody wants to go and watch Star Trek Picard whatever way they can.
I was laughing today, actually. I was reading on IMDb. They have user reviews now, critic reviews. And someone left a 1-star review, said they actually liked it, but wanted to balance out all of the 10-star reviews because he felt it was just... people were giving it too good of a score. So he's like, to balance it out, I'm going to give it 1. I did like it, and these are all the reasons I liked it, but I just feel we need to be balanced. I was like, it's the nicest backhanded compliment ever.
Yeah.
It's just like, I like your stuff, but I feel don't want to get into your head, so I'm going to give you 1 star. But I'm still going to say I like it.
I think it's just crazy, to be honest.
Well, as usual with our first episode, I do a promotion on Facebook just to get it out there that we're doing Star Trek on our podcast, because we've never covered Star Trek before. I promoted the post for a couple of days, and of course, it did attract a few pieces of feedback that we're not going to discuss here, because those pieces of feedback said, I'm not going to watch the show, so what's the point in discussing their feedback on our podcast? Because they're clearly not going to listen to our podcast either, right? So we will be talking about feedback from everybody that did watch the episode, all their thoughts about episode 1. If you want to send in any feedback to us, all you need to do is just email us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can pop over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries and leave your thoughts on the spoiler post that I put up each week.
Yes, and of course, to all fellow Trekkies and Trekkers, you can pop over to our website, tvpodcastindustries.com, to subscribe to the podcast. Rate us, leave a review, share the podcast. Sharing the podcast is, of course, sharing the love. And, of course, any good Federation or Romulan supporting podcast player. And we should boldly go into your ear holes, as no podcast has gone before. We're just stretching these now, aren't we, of course?
Yes, and if you would like to help keep our dilithium chambers running, keep the lights on this podcast, feel free to pop over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries, where you can donate a single euro, a single dollar, a single pound, and help keep this podcast going. But of course, you can also support us, as John says, by sharing the love and sharing the podcast.
Absolutely. Let's hop into our feedback. We got our first piece of feedback from Steve Bren. He sent us in a voicemail to our email address.
Hello, fellow Trekkers. This is Steve, and this is for Picard, Season 1, Episode 1, Remembrance. I have to admit, I'm really glad, and I want to thank you guys so much for your preview episode that you did, because it really helped with what was going on in this episode, because I think I was really lost. I actually watched the episode before I listened to your preview podcast. So it really helped with the questions that I had that I was going to be posing to other people and be like, well, what about this Romulan supernova and what's going on with synthetics and all that? So getting the chance to see that was really, or hear that from you guys was really good. And it really helped me with what is going on in this world, because I was never a big TNG fan. Actually, I wasn't a fan of TNG at all. I didn't watch it. So I'm not familiar with the Picard character as other fans of the world and this universe are. So I'm kind of like Chris. I'm a peripheral fan. I watched Voyager. I watched Discovery, and I watched the reruns of TOS, but I don't think I watched any of the other shows. I never watched Next Generation. I never watched Enterprise, the one with Scott Bakula, Deep Space Nine. I never watched any of those other ones. So I don't really have as much invested in this character as other people do. I do enjoy watching Patrick Stewart. I think he did really well, and I liked the way the plot is going. I'm interested to see from here, where do we go, because if both these girls were synthetic, then who are their parents, and is Picard going to go see her parents, or is he just going to seek out the twin? I'm interested enough to keep watching, and can't wait to hear what you guys thought. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much for the voicemail, Steve. Great to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Shock horror that you're not a TNG fan. But I'm with you there with Discovery and the original series as well. I also have a soft spot for Enterprise, and I really like Deep Space Nine as well.
So all of them then?
Yeah, basically. I even like the Whale movie.
I had completely forgot about Enterprise. I kid you not. And every time I think about it, I keep thinking of it just as a prolonged Quantum Leap episode. That's the only way I think of it, because I'm just like, it never got its hooks in me. So it's probably the best way of just thinking about it.
Maybe the next transporter trip will be the trip home for Captain Archer.
Exactly. Hey, Ziggy, because someone has made that fan fiction somewhere.
I'm sure.
Going very quickly to what Steve said, I actually do think this is a thing that a lot of people needed. If you have not listened to our preview episode, listen to it, because you won't be as lost. And it's kind of one of the things I called out in our first episode in the review, which is they don't explain too much. You get a lot more background in the comics and the Children of Mars short trek. So I really think it's something that I think even with episode 2, they still haven't explained very much of it. They've kind of given a bit more. But anyway, I do think that, yes, if you still have some questions, go back and listen to John and Derek talk about the preview episode, because that really does help and lay a bit more groundwork.
Yeah, I'm glad we're able to help. This is kind of the podcast where we remove the word obviously. That's one of the words we're not allowed to say on the podcast, as you probably know by now, Steve.
Obviously.
So that kind of helps people that may not have watched all of the Star Trek shows. There's 700-800 episodes of the shows. There's definitely going to be something that we've missed, and there's hopefully going to be something that you've missed, and we can help point you towards if we know the answer to it. And hopefully, if we don't know the answer to something, you could send us in your feedback and let us know what we missed.
Yeah, and speaking of comics, we will be covering the third and final issue of the Picard preview comic, or prelude comics to this series that came out this week.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll be covering that in a short little podcast snippet to interject between our episode 2 and our episode 3 coverage of Star Trek Picard, the series.
Can I give you my spoiler-free reaction to issue 3?
Go on.
Not as life-changing as I thought it was going to be. There you go.
Okay.
Okay, we will leave that to the podcast then.
We'll get in deep on that one on our podcast.
Yes, thanks again, Steve, for the voicemail. Over on Facebook, Bob Phillips says, loving the threads of mysteries developing here. Does Data know the future? Is Dahj's twin sister a terrorist or a spy? Are the Romulans being Borg masters or archivists of architecture? Does the physical frailty of Picard tell us where the peril will emerge, or hint at where he may be underestimated in the future? One question to Chris Jones. Did Jessica Dahj do a superhuman jump, or did she fly? Yes, Chris. This is a Jessica Jones reference,
Yes,
everyone, from our Defenders TV podcast. And when we covered the Marvel Netflix series, and there was a continuous battle between Chris and Derek as to whether Jessica Jones actually had the superhuman ability to fly, or whether she could simply dunk a basketball really well by jumping and jumping high. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Jumping high.
No comment.
I would definitely say that Dahj, for sure, did a superhuman jump there.
Yeah. Yes, she did. In Dahj in this jumped. She has the bionic legs of a billion credit woman and is able to jump quite far. Jessica Jones does fly. Different thing, though.
Yeah, and I think
disagree, Chris.
and coming back to the Star Trek stuff, I think the physical frailty of Picard. I think there's an interesting moment in episode 2 in this episode around Picard's sort of physical well-being and his health for sure. And yes, Romulans. I wonder if they are archiving another race and another race's architecture. I think they're kind of doing the good old strip and run. And by stripping, I mean stripping the Borg ship, not kind of doing a in public.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I love Bob's turn of phrase. I love the idea of archivists of architecture. Fantastic. Love Bob. Thank you for your feedback. Chris, do you want to take the next piece of feedback?
Sure. We have some feedback from Sergio Collins, who says, I saw the first episode yesterday night, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but does Sir Patrick Stewart really look that old, or was he meant to just look that way for the series? I know he's 79, but man, he's always been a hero of mine and sort of a role model. I guess it just hits me really hard to realise he's not the young captain I knew back when the series premiered. Nevertheless, his performance is absolutely great. Can't wait to see the next chapter. Thank you, Sergio. Yeah, we actually talked about this in our episode 1 review. Yes, the actor, Sir Patrick Stewart, is 79. We feel that they've aged him up to be the 90-something-year-old Picard he's supposed to be in the series. He's a bit more frail. He's a bit more... he's not as spry as he is when you would see him in an interview on like the Graham Norton show or The View or some of the interview circuits he's been doing. Either that or they're just shoving a load of cocaine into him as he does the interview circuits with PR. Because he's a bit more spry and jumpy and running around on those. But pretty sure that's not what they're doing.
Probably not the case, though.
I think it's just Patrick Stewart is portraying the 90-something-year-old Picard that he's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's between 92 and 94. Some discrepancy as to the actual description on that. But in episode 2, we definitely saw a reason as to why I think they were doing that in the first episode. We'll get to that as we get into our episode 2 discussion. Jim Carrey added, yes, all the gravitas and intimacy and heart. Since I'm in the midst of a Star Trek Next Generation rewatch, his physical appearance was stark and saddening. Obviously, I've aged too, but I didn't just watch a video of myself in 1991 and look in the mirror. Oh, very good. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, he is 79. And I remember an interview with him on the Graham Norton show. And certainly, he said he still works out to keep himself in shape because obviously acting is a demanding role in itself. Certainly if you're doing theatre stuff where it's quick changes, racing around backstage, having to project the voice, use your diaphragm, all that kind of thing, almost a bit like singing in a way. And also just the stamina of maybe doing matinees and an evening performance. And, you know, if you're on Broadway, you're in the West End, you're doing it every night, pretty much with maybe only one or two, probably just one day off, normally in a run. Certainly, you know, as it hits, the theatre circuit. So, I think, you know, a lot of actors have to keep themselves in physical shape because of the physical nature of the role. And I suppose the mental aspect of the role in terms of, you know, inhabiting someone else's character and the nuances you're having to put into that and the concentration around it. So I think he does keep himself sort of tip-top shape. But certainly, yeah, I watched The Next Generation on Netflix there just last night. And I think we were looking at unification. part 1 with the Romulans, and it was, there's even still a little bit of her on Jean-Luc Picard there, but he looks so much younger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're talking 30 years ago.
Absolutely. Videos of me about 30 years ago. I guess I'd still be in short pants, right? Just some other...
Still in short shorts.
Exactly. Just some quick reactions from some of the people over in the Facebook group. Teresa says, I watched it and liked it so far. Looking forward to the next episode. Roger Sprong said, I just finished watching it. I am hooked. Richard Mighton said, great start to the episode. And John Bratt says, as it's only just started, you have to get a bit of backstory. Yes, it started slow because of that. Then it did get better as it's only episode 1. Come on, folks. Things are going to get much better and much more interesting as the series goes on. Thanks, John, Richard, Teresa, and Roger for that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that feedback. Claire Payne said, my knowledge of Jean-Luc Picard and Star Trek Next Generation is very limited, as I have only seen the films, never any of the television shows. So essentially I'm watching Star Trek Picard as a newbie.
Excellent.
The trailer had me intrigued, as I knew Sir Patrick Stewart had not played this role for a long time, but I knew he was considered one of the great captains of Star Trek, just by talking and listening to friends and family as they respected this character greatly. I surprised myself at how much I enjoyed it. I watched on the Friday night, and I've not been able to stop thinking about it. Visually, I think it is brilliant, as you have a mix of familiar style living with the advanced technology of the future, which actually didn't look out of place. When Jean-Luc Picard was being interviewed, this was one of my standout scenes because he looked so uncomfortable, and I felt uncomfortable for him. The whole episode went so quickly. I was fully engaged, and I'm delighted it's a weekly show. I don't really need to point out the obvious in how excellent the acting, writing, and how this episode was presented. Thank you, Claire, for that feedback. I really like your point on the advanced technology. I think, again, it was just that, I think I mentioned it on our first podcast, that being on Earth, it was just really good to see it. Seeing the replicator in a normal domestic kitchen, for example, was really good. And I know in terms of that interview with Jean-Luc Picard, there was an element of deep exposition there, but still, the shots of him wringing his hands, getting kind of more agitated, it was really good because, again, it picks out and breaks up that exposition heavy part of that interview for sure. And I think as a newbie to the world of the Next Generation through Star Trek Picard, I think that's great that you enjoyed it. So hopefully you enjoy the rest of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. Claire, thanks so much for your feedback. It's great to hear a newbie on board really enjoying the show, isn't it?
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Claire. And yeah, exactly. It's nice to see kind of that this can bring in a new fan base to a degree. New people who probably didn't grow up on, well, for all those who didn't grow up on the Next Generation, and all those who are actually now interested and kind of potentially just missed Star Trek back then when they were growing up, and now who can get in through this series. Yeah, really great. Thank you so much for your feedback, Claire. Over on our Twitter account at TV Pod Industries, we had some feedback from Bill Hay, NBA. He said, solid start, gritty show so far, action-packed and minimal Trek cheese so far. I've actually seen some of this, that people felt there was always back in the day, say from the TOS and the Next Generation. Sorry, TOS is the original series. So this is the Kirk Spock. So this is the one where you had a bit more leotard fun. But yes, there was people saying that there was like a lot more cheese in it. I actually think a lot of the Star Trek since then hasn't had much quote unquote cheese. It's just Gene Roddenberry had a very optimistic view of the future when he was writing about the Federation and Starfleet and looking at that. And I think that's where this perceived cheese comes from.
Well, there are a lot of Star Trek fans that do mourn the fact that it's gone away from the utopian future that Gene Roddenberry came up with for the original Star Trek. But there always had to be conflict over time. I would say, remember Star Trek in the old days, Star Trek Next Generation particularly had like 26 episodes in some of their seasons, so some of the things we perceive as cheese is probably just fast writing to fill up their season of half a year worth of show, So you're always expecting a little bit of cheese occasionally in there.
Yeah, and
personally, I love cheese. A bit of brie, a bit of Emmerdale, a bit of Elemental, always good.
Emmerdale is a TV soap opera. It's Wensleydale.
Or Emmenthal.
That's the one.
Yes. I must say, yeah, I would happily buy Star Trek cheese if it was in the cheese counter. No doubt it would be a bluey green vein cheese.
Maybe.
So, kind of be a bit Romulan.
I certainly
for sure.
wouldn't be buying Emmerdale cheese. Anyway, back to your feedback.
Yes, and finally on Instagram, you can find us there on TV Podcast Industries. Disco Sane says, that young actress is amazing, playing opposite Patrick Stewart. She was really good, while he was phenomenal himself. Of that, absolutely. I think Issa Briones, who played Dahj and Soji, really, really good in this role, and she was really good, as you say, against and acting with Patrick Stewart in those scenes for sure. Alexia Bouvard echoes that sentiment and said it was an amazing episode. So yes, I think there's generally really good reviews out there. I think there's some really good feedback. I mean, each to their own, and certainly, the negative feedback that I think we've seen, at least, is referring to things like it being social justice warriors, all this kind of thing, and you're kind of going, well, okay, so be it. Probably not the show for you.
Absolutely. Weirdly, one of the biggest reactions that I saw out there was to a review from EW.com. They used to be Entertainment Weekly. They've now gone monthly, so clearly looking for a couple of clicks on their website. Gave it a 2-star review, saying they've created nothing new. That is so far beyond what most people have been reviewing this show that it makes you feel like they're probably looking for clicks, right?
Probably.
I feel so, yes.
Anyway, thanks everybody for your feedback. Keep in contact with us as we go through the series. Keep emailing us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can go over to our website and leave a voicemail. Record your thoughts at tvpodcastindustries.com.
Yes, record up to 90 seconds of your thoughts about the week's episode. Mm-hmm. That's great to hear from everyone, and thanks so much for the feedback. Keep it coming on in for episode 2 or episode 1 if you're coming a bit later, as well as for all the episodes to come here on our discussion podcasts of Star Trek Picard. But I think we should get into episode 2 for sure, because, yes, Maps and Legends. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Really easy one. This episode was written by Michael Chabon and Akiva Goldsman, both executive producers on the show. Both wrote the last week's episode as well. And episode 2 was directed by Hanelle M. Culpepper. A big apology. I called her Hanelle M. Culpepper last week because I hadn't actually seen her interviewed before. I did that on Gotham when she was directing Gotham as well. But I saw her interviewed directly after we did the episode, and it's Hanelle M. Culpepper. So I won't make that mistake again. She is fascinating. If you do get to watch The Ready Room, it's a 20-minute or so after show presented by Will Wheaton. And
Will Wheaton,
exactly, yes, he had the producers on last week, and he also had a great bit about the music on the show. Chris, you definitely should check that out if you've enjoyed the music. It showed kind of the reason and how they came up with the theme tune for the show, from the very opening of it, why it starts with a single instrument and goes into the building form that it does. It's definitely fascinating. Really enjoyed that.
Excellent. We all love Will Wheaton.
We do all love Will Wheaton.
Will Wheaton.
Will Wheaton.
John, do you want to give us the official episode description for this episode of Star Trek Picard?
Sure. Picard begins investigating the mystery of Dahj, as well as what her very existence means to the Federation. Without Starfleet's support, Picard is left leaning on others for help, including Dr. Agnes Jurati and an estranged former colleague, Raffi Musiker. Meanwhile, hidden enemies are also interested in where Picard's search for the truth about Dahj will lead. Yes, this really felt like a building on the previous episode, and the start of seeing Picard move tentatively back towards the stars from his terrestrial start in episode 1. But I think without further ado, we should get onto our prime directive. For all you fellow Trekkers and Trekkies joining us, our structure to the Picard podcast here on TV Podcast Industries is we have our large point, the Prime Directive, and then we move to our general orders with the Omega Directive, followed by Make It So #1 for our smallest point. So we have a large, middle, and small point. So, Prime Directive, here we come.
We must face the ramifications of the Prime Directive.
Who wants to go first and face the ramifications of their Prime Directive? John?
Yes, I wouldn't mind going first
not?
for once. So I can... No, I won't. I won't do as Chris blamed me last week for taking a point that is basically the entire episode. But the point I want to have is I'm loving the lore here, in particular around the Romulans. And in this episode, we get to hear of this older Romulan cabal called the Shadfash, which is kind of... well, it's described as this cabal that was before the Tal Shiar. It's mentioned by Loris and Zhaban, who used to be members of the Tal Shiar. It's almost like this legend or myth in Romulan culture, of this very secretive, much more older, ancient cabal called the Shadvash, which came before the Tal Shiar. And you have this sort of, great description that they operate with loathing. I mean, if that doesn't sound like the Gestapo plus, so, then I don't know what does. But that they are very, very secretive, probably the most secretive of all Romulan cabals, because they're actually thought of as a myth or a legend, I suppose, if they do actually exist.
I love that idea where she says, you think the Tal Shiar are the secret police? No, wait till you meet the secret police.
Yeah. And it was just, they hide in the shadows, but it's that they go against any treaty or protocol, both within Romulus as well, within the Romulan Empire, but also they'll operate on other planets. So effectively infiltrate deep cover with other planets in other galaxies, in other star systems. And they very much are based around a hatred of effectively synthetic life forms and artificial intelligence. So the assumption here is that the sort of black ops Romulans that were coming for Dahj were secretive members of the Shadvash, and I suppose why they would rather dissolve themselves and kill themselves with the acid pill rather than be captured. That we saw in the last episode when Dahj was taken out by the acid and the exploding phaser.
Yeah.
So, this is a really sort of, nice little bit of lore coming in here on the Romulans, that that this is the puppet master actually for the whole, or potentially the whole Romulan Empire, and certainly maybe for the Tal Shiar. And you're starting to question then, is it real, or is it just this children's fairy tale used to scare the children, like Red Riding Hood or whatever it might be, with the wolves, Hansel and Gretel going into the dark forest, or is it real? Is Loris right here? Because Zhaban certainly seems to be saying, look, no, it's complete myth. It's not at all true. Yeah. But she is convinced because, there are the rumors, there are the legends, that come through, and that they have come from somewhere. So I really enjoyed this element to this episode for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is where I have a question. So when we talk about the Tal Shiar and the Chatfash, are we kind of going like the Freemasons and then the Illuminati, which is, so like the Freemasons are, everyone knows they're there, and no one really knows that, no one believes that the Illuminati are real. So is it kind of like that, or are we, the Tal Shiar are more like Gestapo? The
Tal Shiar, I suppose, they operate in secret as well. So everybody knows they exist, but nobody knows who the members of them are. They don't present themselves as part of a government or anything like that. they are massively secretive. So you've seen them in some episodes of Star Trek in the past, but they are a secret police force. But it's kind of interesting seeing, as John mentioned, seeing Loris, who is a former member of the Tal Shiar, saying, you thought they were the secret ones. They're not even close. You can't even find out their identities. Wait till you hear about the Chat Vash. You know, that is kind of it's an idea that, yes, there is a secret police, but there's an even more secret police that you didn't even know about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of, the Tal Shiar is like MI6 or the CIA or that kind of thing. The Zhat Vash is almost like the
Black Ops,
the covert. No one knows that this is happening. However, not even the people that shouldn't know what's happening know that they exist. It's outside of the structures of the Tal Shiar. It's a cabal. It's like Spectre, say, in Bond, or something like that, where it's operating under official channels, if you were.
And this seems like it's going to form a big part of the show. And as you say, John, this is building up new lore that Star Trek Picard can now investigate and kind of reveal parts of as the show goes on, which I just think is really interesting. Chris, do you want to take us on to your Prime Directive?
Yeah. So mine is kind of directly related to what John was talking about and this Chat Vash, which is we're introduced to Narek and Narissa. Well, we're introduced to Narissa as Lieutenant Rizzo.
Rizzo!
She has had surgery to make herself look human. So we assume she is Romulan as well. Or the Chat Vash take non-Romulan species. We're not quite sure.
No, I think there's a gag in there, Chris, and I think you even talked about Star Trek, The Voyage Home earlier on, Star Trek 4. The little gag in there when Narek is joking about her appearance, saying you look like you've been plucked, and that's a reference to Spock having the pointy ears back in his return to Earth in Star Trek 4, where he said the reason he had it was because he got picked by a rice picking machine on his ears, and that's why his ears are pointy. So it's a little joke that she has no points in her ears, and she looks like she's been plucked when Spock had points in his ears, and he looked like he'd been picked. So there you go. So yes, it would seem that it is his actual sister, and she's also Romulan. Yeah.
Okay, so then she's undergone surgery to look human. So this starts raising questions. So you can't just have surgery to make yourself look human. There's going to be biological tests when you join Starfleet to become lieutenant. So there's obviously more to it than that. But anyway, they are both Chat Vash. This is what we are assuming. One has infiltrated Starfleet and is reporting to a Vulcan Commodore who we've yet to get a name for. We just hear her introduced as Commodore and referred to as Commodore. But she seems high-ranking based on her conversation with the other admiral. And then we see that Narek has definitely infiltrated the Romulan cube, or he's somehow getting in there and controlling some of the things on that cube.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an infiltration.
See, this is the one I'm definitely questioning, and I'm sure this is the kind of thing that will be revealed as the show goes on. I don't know whether these two are Chat Vash, because we only just learned about them in the episode. I've never heard of the people before. I was just thinking they maybe were Tal Shiar and aren't involved in the Chat Vash plot. Potentially they're just standard Tal Shiar secret police or secret underground people who are embedding themselves in these organizations with their plot of domination of some sort, whatever it may be. I don't know whether they're Chat Vash at all. I don't know whether that's definite until we see a bit more about Chat Vash.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're certainly led to understand here that at the heart of some command structure within Starfleet, within the Federation, there is some deep undercover element of the Romulan Empire, whether that is Tal Shiar, which it could conceivably be, or whether it is this newly discovered for Trekkies, the Chat Vash, at least newly discovered for me.
There you go.
But certainly, I think there's something rotten in the Federation, in Starfleet. But to what extent maybe that Commodore is aware of that is difficult to know.
Yeah.
Because certainly, yes, she is hiding her Romulan ears by rounding them off. So she is effectively in disguise here. However, she is doing that.
And a nice little reference there. We were, as John mentioned, we were watching the episode of Star Trek Next Generation, where Picard infiltrates the Romulans by getting some plastic surgery done to look like a Romulan. And Data goes with him, also gets some plastic surgery to look like a Romulan. So I like this idea that there's somebody else infiltrating them by getting plastic surgery to look like a human. Kind of cool.
The one thing I'll bring in is I wonder if this has anything to do with Section 31. Which is the kind of secret police of Starfleet. It's been introduced and was heavily talked about in Discovery. Season 2.
Heavily involved in Deep Space Nine as well.
Exactly. The reason I bring this up is that in Discovery, spoilers, there is a part regarding surgery to look human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to give away too much, but the reason that's I'm kind of bringing that in. So potentially this might be a Section 31 thing as well.
And there is a spin-off series featuring Section 31 already been announced that should be coming up reasonably soon. But probably a smart idea to bring it into Star Trek Picard as well, right?
Definitely.
Oh, is there? I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other interesting thing is that, assuming that Narissa and Narek, as brother and sister, if they are Zhad, then everything that's happening on the Borg ship in terms of what the Romulans are doing, they would seemingly be against this whole thing, since they are absolutely fundamentally against and have a hatred for synthetics and artificial intelligence. And this idea of the collective could be an anathema to them, to be honest. And so is it to kind of destroy them, or is this whole hatred of AI and synthetics something a little different? Because one of the interesting things on that we were told was that, technology in Romulan society is much more just functional. So they've never had synthetics. They don't want androids. They don't, and it's the synthetic humanoid artificial intelligence of the technology that they are opposed. And here you have that merging of the two with the Borg, so that it's something I feel that this cabal would be fundamentally against. The idea that you could actually produce an android, or is it a cyborg when it's part human, but some form of cyborg android. It's not a robot, I know that, but into Romulan society. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Are they trying to undermine this, Romulan reclamation site as much as trying to get at Soji, who they also believe then is a fully formed android?
Maybe, maybe. This is where we're probably going to talk about it a lot more later on, but this is where I feel that the Chadvash were more likely involved in the Mars attack that happened, to set the blame on the artificial intelligence or the synthetic life forms. Potentially that's the reasoning behind why the attack happened, was to get them all shut down and take them out of society. Maybe that was it, but we'll get onto that a bit later on. The one that I wanted to talk about in my big moment for the episode was Picard trying to get approval from Starfleet, because we've heard in dialogue and we've heard in preview discussions for the show that Picard is kind of separated away from Starfleet a bit, but this is our first real moment where we're seeing Admiral Picard going to Starfleet looking for help. He's dealing with Admiral Kristen Clancy, and he's just sitting down where they're kind of going, well, all I need is a simple ship, and I don't mind no longer being Admiral Picard. I don't mind being just captain. And then we get our first F word, I think, in all of Star Trek, as far as I remember anyway, where she tells him that he's just being completely arrogant in front of her, and she cannot believe how arrogant he is. The idea of them giving back his commission to him after he walked away in this, under this dark cloud, I suppose. So I thought that was fascinating, that we have Picard, who used to be the hero of Starfleet, effectively walking in firstly The guy behind the desk doesn't even know who he is, has to ask for his full details and credentials to just get a pass in. And then this admiral that he's speaking to isn't willing to give him the time of day. Is telling him to get out and don't darken the door again. You've made your bed, lie in it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I loved this scene with the two admirals together, because I just loved the fact that Jean-Luc Picard didn't get what he thought he was going to. Actually, there was a deep arrogance almost of Jean-Luc Picard that he would be able to go in and he could set out what he wanted to do, like you would have seen him do on The Next Generation, where it would be planned, considered, thought through, and then the approval requested. Gosh, it just sounded like the civil service. And, you would get the sign off and it would all be above board and formalized. And here, Admiral Clancy is having none of it. Yeah. She is just like, how dare you come in here? As you say, you've made your bed, you lie in it. We're not just simply going to, have you click your fingers and we all jump. Yeah. That's gone. You're retired. Off you go back to Chateau Picard, and down a bit more of the vintage red, and I really enjoyed this. I felt it really, put Picard in his place, and but in a humiliating fashion. I think it's not something you would have seen so much in The Next Generation, but I just thought the clash of these two characters, and the humility then that Picard has to go, because ultimately she calls the shots here. Yeah, I thought it was really, really so well acted and played out within this scene. I really, really enjoyed it, and dare I say it that maybe it was the second time there was swearing in Star Trek, because earlier in the episode, Loris, the Romulan, says cheeky feckers in a very Irish accent.
In a very Irish accent, yes. Cheeky feckers. Feckers never seen as a curse word, though, so it's all right.
No, I suppose not. But we know what it really means.
Yeah, cheeky feckers.
Such a great term. But yes, I loved this scene. I thought it was absolutely great.
Yeah, really, really good. I know a lot of fans of Voyager were hoping that the Admiral was going to be Admiral Janeway. But with this outcome, would you really want Admiral Janeway to be the one to send Picard off with his marching orders?
No, not at all. I think what they're going to do is save... if she's not in this season, for a later part of the season, I think they're saving a lot of surprises, quote unquote. Yeah. So we already know that Riker will be in it, and he if he's in it, he's going to do the Riker sit down,
maybe
the Riker maneuver. So that will happen.
Maybe we do know he's directing some episodes this season as well, which would be kind of cool to have him back behind the camera for this show.
But I think what we'll do is we'll get Worf, we'll get Geordi LaForge, and somehow
maybe
I think what we'll get is one or two people in this. I think potentially as well could get a Janeway in it. If not, based on the success of this, we'll definitely get them for season 2. Like we called out in our episode 1, is that Whoopi Goldberg will be reprising her role as Guinan in season 2. And that was announced on The View as part of the season 1 kind of PR kind of circuit. Yeah. So I think we'll get some of that as well. Yeah. But I'm with you anyway, taking completely back to the main point, which is this is a really interesting scene.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of my favourites from the episode. Really interesting to see what's happened to the character. That's it for our Prime directives. Let's get on to our Omega directives.
Implement the Omega directive immediately.
John, are you going to also implement your Omega directive?
Yes, it's going to be, it's 14 years earlier, actually. Right. I really like this sort of look back to the Mars shipyards and 14 years before and the attack on those shipyards of Starfleet by the rogue synths. I think it's really nice that it's connecting back to then. It's the genesis of where this has happened. This is where the mystery, this is where the hub of the mystery is really in that sense. And it links to the short trek Children of Mars nicely, as well as the Prelude comics as well that we've been covering in our preview podcast. And I really enjoyed this because, first of all, I thought F8, the creepy android, one of the replicated androids, was just so nicely done. Just the piercing eyes. I mean, they're exactly the same eyes as Data.
They look very similar.
You know, in that sense, but it's the same tone of skin as well as Data. Mm-hmm. But there is something creepy about it. Whereas I never got that from Data. You know, it was maybe because F8 is bald, but he was creepy, and he goes creepier basically when he goes rogue. There's that great kind of moment, where it's almost like an Order 66 where he switches on, where he starts bringing down all the shields and all that, and
fantastic.
Turns effectively on his human overlords. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a real nice touch seeing the blood from the human overlords from the laser blast. I'm not too sure it was a laser. Or a laser weapon. I think it may have been a tool, a cutting tool or something like that.
Or a phaser in this universe. John.
Or a phaser even, yes. But I like the fact that when he shoots them with this tool or phaser, mm-hmm. that you do get a little bit of pooled blood there, because it's quite a big entry wound. And I just thought, certainly the Next Generation from the 90s wouldn't have had sort of that kind of aspect to it, and I quite like that. But I thought this was, I thought F8 was just really good, and I liked how it just showed, again, that relationship of humans to androids. They're interacting with him to effectively joke at his expense, because they know he doesn't have the emotions. He will speak literally, and there's no real empathy there for this android, and that absolutely sets them apart from Data. Mm-hmm. Again, recently looking back at some of the Next Generation, the episode where Data is having to prove that he is a sentient being, with the Dr. Maddox as mm-hmm. well. That whole episode, just in terms of that he has consciousness, that he is sentient, that he is intelligent, these 3 different rules that Dr. Maddox is giving him. And you can see the absolute sort of difference here with these androids who have been built, created to simply work on the ships in Starfleet's shipyards, mm-hmm. And for no other reason, purely for a technical and sort of physical and speed reason in terms of the job that they do.
Yeah.
That's a really nice sort of contrast with Data from both the first episode in this, but also more generally with the Next Generation and his whole sort of development and arc across the many seasons of the Next Generation.
Yeah, it feels like F8 has been programmed with a call and response unit, basically. You hear them telling a joke and he knows how to answer and respond to them every time they start delivering the punchline to him, kind of thing. But they know he doesn't get jokes. They know he doesn't understand what's going on. So very interesting. I had this whole section described as Lieutenant Pincus and the Plastic People, Fate Comes to Mars. Because I like the idea that it's F8, which is fate. And this is about to bring down everything that's going right for Starfleet, I suppose. So I kind of like that.
Yeah, I love this bit in that it answers questions, but raises a few more for me. In that he suddenly F8 fate. I didn't get that until you said it. By the way, thank you.
Many years of watching sci-fi movies.
TV. Just seeing his eyes download the message, mm-hmm. download the program. It definitely raised questions as to what happened. It for me. So again, it's not like it was an oops moment, if you know what I mean. So it was definitely an uprising. So it means something was dialed in. For me, it seemed like it was an outside intrusion.
Absolutely,
if you will.
yeah, absolutely. The big question now is, everybody's been saying for decades this is caused by rogue synths, and do we think now, after watching this first scene really of the attack on Mars from the inside, do we think this is something that it was an uprising of the synthetics, or do we think it was controlled by external, or do we think a rogue synthetic is controlling it from externally? It could be multitude of things that cause this to happen, but it doesn't seem to be something that happened by mistake.
Exactly. So the way that it was portrayed as an uprising to me, I got the feeling like they were a downtrodden slave units, that in this 14 years earlier, we were going to see F8 be slapped around, pushed over, the easy fall to slave kind of trope, where he gets whipped one too many times and then rises up.
Right.
I assumed that was what they meant by uprising.
Yes, absolutely. And after playing Detroit Become Human last year on the PlayStation 4, I was absolutely expecting that to be the trajectory of what happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And instead what they give us is F8 doesn't understand the jokes, but the Starfleet shipyard staff, they are friendly with them.
Yeah.
And one makes a joke at F8's expense, and the other two go, "Hey, he can hear you.
Yeah.
He has super hearing. He's next door." And he goes, "Oh, it doesn't matter. He still heard it." But like they're nice, so it's not the abused, downtrodden kind of synthetics rising up.
Yeah.
It seems like it was, as you said, it could have been someone else or another synthetic using the synthetics on Mars to destroy and attack.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it seems like I say localized, but they've risen up on Mars, and now the little bit of atmosphere that there is on Mars is still on fire, I think they say in the first episode.
I don't know how that works. But yeah.
Or whether it's just from the stuff that they were mining, or the chemicals or whatever, that, Mars is still on fire. So basically it's unlikely that anyone has survived. So, that there's no story of the synthetics kind of doing, as you say, that kind of upload to them in order to change them.
Yeah.
I think the question for me is still the ships that then come in, because he takes down the defense grid, the ships that come in to effectively attack from the orbit of Mars. Again, are they operated by synths, or are they operated by someone else? And hopefully that will get shown over the course of time.
Exactly. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing a bit more about that. Chris, do you want to give us your Omega Directive?
Sure. For me, it is Laris and Zhaban. We were introduced to them in episode 1. We know that they were Tal Shiar. There's a bit of backstory for those who have read the comics. I haven't, but that they owe Jean-Luc their lives. They've been caring for him, quote unquote, on his chateau with him. But especially, I'm finding that they're useful in this situation, in that they knew about the Chat Vash. They know about the inner workings of the Tal Shiar. They know about the Romulans. Jean-Luc trusts them. Yes, they are useful plot characters, but they're actually good characters. If I want to kind of bring this out, that yes, Laris does have a terrible Irish accent to a degree. It's not bad. It's just every now and again it comes out with a bit of Begari Jesus. Where's me Lucky Charms? Which fine. Okay, we'll allow it. But I don't think she actually is Irish.
She is, yes.
She is?
Yep.
My God, then she is hamming it up.
I love it.
I felt seen, Chris. When you see an actor on TV saying a phrase like "you dirty feckers," you do feel like you're back watching an Irish movie like The Snapper or The Commitments or something. It really feels like something from Ireland. A real Irish voice up on a TV screen is great. Don't really understand how the Romulans have an Irish accent, but hey, look, that doesn't matter.
No, the phrases, I agree with you. It was great. It was just, she hammed it up a bit. But anyway, I like these characters. They feel actually, they have a bit of depth to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really hoping they continue to be useful.
Yeah.
What I don't want to see is that they come, now that they've given up the Shat Vash information, they've given up their boogeymen, that their Baba Yaga, kind of, for those who are fans of John Wick, that their big boogeymen, their Baba Yagas, their mythology, they've given that out and don't really see much more of them, except right at the end when they die or something like that. Where they're used to lure Picard back, and they're hostages or something like that. I really want them to be
Active characters.
ingrained in this.
Yeah.
Kind of, not tertiary characters, more ingrained.
Chris, as we said before, in the spirit of the X-Files, trust no one.
It's true. That being said, I can sincerely see them being Shat Vash, or at least one of them, and they will come out, how could you do this? Like, because they're lovers and married and stuff.
Maybe.
One of them won't know.
I just can't see that being a big reveal.
No.
When they've just given all the information to Picard. They probably would have kept it a bit more secretive.
But
she gave the information about Shat Vash.
Exactly.
He didn't.
Yes. So I must say, I'm kind of there going, ooh, that could be sort of the little hint,
Right.
for sure. I did like Loris with the, what was it? They called it the digital scrubbers in Dahj's apartment. I thought that was really, really nice. And that's kind of where we understood about how Romulans really do use technology in a very sort of detached way. It is for a functional purpose. They are not suddenly going to have an android or AI. It's for analysis. It's for scanning. It's that kind of stuff. So I liked her digital scrubbers.
Which is perfect, because I think that brings us on to Derek.
It does, yeah, because the central mystery of the series really at the moment seems to be who's Dahj and where's she from and what's the connection, I suppose. And we get a lot of that backstory here on Dahj throughout these scenes with Loris, when we have everything replaying and getting more and more information. I really like the idea that we find out that Dahj is aware of her sister in this episode. We heard nothing about her in the first episode, but we know that Dahj has been calling her sister and her sister's been calling her, so she must be well aware of who her sister is. We know that she was created 3 years previously, or it's worked out that she created just 3 years ago, and the rest of her history and the rest of her life is fabricated. So I kind of like that we have these extra layers being added as well to the story. You know, the question that we had before was, if she's about 20 years old, well, when was she created? Was she created by Dr. Bruce Maddox before this attack on Mars? Well, if she's only 3 years old, it sounds like she probably was created quite recently. Yeah. So potentially all of this work is going on off-world by Dr. Maddox, and she's been sent back to this Earth to do something, and her sister Soji has been sent on to the Borg Cube to do something, some kind of mission for him as well. So lots of very interesting connections and lots of very interesting investigations going on into the life of Dahj and the life of Soji, I think, in this episode.
Call me suspicious, but her backstory could have been created 3 years ago because she's been around longer, and now it's about infiltration into human society. Now, okay, she's dead, but what's the deal with Soji is the thing, and she's in as a Romulan. You know, she's the. So is it that these rogue synths? You know, again, coming to the question of what Chris said. You know, is it an upload to the androids that made them go rogue? Or is it some kind of self-awareness of becoming rogue in that way? You know, almost a bit like Cyberdyne systems, where it gets self-conscious and decides that actually humans are pretty naff, or Romulans are pretty naff, or Vulcans are pretty naff. Look what they're doing, and the only way is to get rid of them.
They are flesh and blood over metal, just like the Terminators in that movie, yeah.
Or in terms of what use they are being put to, which is, you know, effectively hard labor, essentially, or doing the work in place of humans, Romulans, Vulcans, etc. So it's like, is that the reason why this elaborate backstory with Mother, with their education history and so on, was only created 3 years ago? But again, we'll see as the episodes drop.
Mm-hmm. Agreed, yeah, but I just felt it was a big kind of moment for the episode because we need to know more about this character if she's going to take us on a journey and take Picard out into space again. She needs to be really important, so I'm intrigued by what they're giving us so far. Let's get on to our number one, our small moment from the episode.
Make it so, number one.
John, do you want to continue with your number one?
Sure, yeah. My small moment for this episode is when Jean-Luc Picard meets with Dr. Benoit, played by David Paymer. I really enjoyed this in that you, first of all, you know, for a 94-year-old, you're in rude health, and the whole meeting is to get Picard back into space. But, you know, he has almost this flawless physical health, or health in general, but there's something that he brings up, an unnamed medical problem that's discussed by these two former colleagues, and it's not mentioned, and maybe it's not a medical issue, and maybe I just mistook the conversation, but that's the thing that is preventing him from getting effectively his license so that he can do go back into space and do interstellar travel. And yet he can spin on a dime, run 100 meters probably faster than
me.
Yeah, and me. Yet there is something, there's a medical issue or problem or condition that is effectively preventing him from going back into space. And I thought that was intriguing. I think it links a bit to what Bob Phillips was saying in the feedback around physical frailty, or something else. And maybe whether it's PTSD or some kind of problematic condition on mental health, or you know, something like Alzheimer's maybe, or dementia. I don't know. But even something that this advanced Earth with its medical advances isn't able to deal with in some way. But again, maybe it's not something that will be explored any further, but I was just wondering, what is it? I also think it's quite nice that Dr. Benoit is a former medical officer on the USS Stargazer, which we saw in the vault in episode 1, one of Picard's earlier ships that he captained.
His first command, yes.
Yes, exactly.
And there weren't very many named characters that were on the Stargazer in the show, so that's kind of interesting. And definitely seeing the character played by David Paymer on the show, I was kind of going, these two were meeting like old friends. They're both really good actors, so they're selling that they've known each other all their lives kind of thing. And I was like, is he from the show? Is he from Star Trek? Because it convinced me instantly that I must have seen these two interact before in the past, you know. The only medical condition that I'm aware of with Jean-Luc Picard is that his heart was replaced. He doesn't have he has an artificial heart, which almost stopped once in the past, killing him. That's the only medical condition I'm aware of. I don't know how that resolved towards the end of the show, but that potentially could be it, that effectively he's lived such a long life now that the heart that he got when he was in his 20s after an attack can't survive another massive trip out into the universe. Maybe it's something like that. But
because Dr. Benoit does say you're medically fit for interstellar service, and then says, but there's that one thing.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he just meant his resignation and the whole issue effectively that we see with Admiral Clancy.
Maybe. Yeah.
But just because it was coming from the doctor, it felt like it was a medical issue that he wasn't divulging because they both were intimately aware of it. So I just thought that was interesting. I was wondering if that was the case, and just to see whether maybe it's, you know, because Picard is 94, because life everlasting hasn't come to even the humans 4 centuries from now, that that everyone's still mortal, that there is some things that they still simply can't treat medically, and whether it's a reference to that, I thought was interesting, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it won't be come up again. But I just thought it was an interesting little moment in that conversation between two former colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
I think he says something along the lines of there's something in your lobe, so kind of the frontal lobe of the brain.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it's still a medical condition, but maybe it's something more neurological or to do with sort of, diseases of the brain and the nervous system and that kind of thing.
Can I bring something up? What if it's a foreign object? What if it's something from his days as Locutus?
Maybe, exactly.
Maybe.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. For those who are kind of joining Star Trek Picard for the first time, back in The Next Generation, Picard was turned for about 2 or 3 episodes into a Borg. Mm-hmm. He was assimilated, and on that time his name was Locutus. So he was assimilated and then turned back. So, based on what we know that this is the Borg are involved in this series, it could be that basically this unidentified problem in his brain is something that was injected there from the Borg back in the day. Because that will play in nicely to the story with the Borg and everything.
Absolutely. I was wondering whether it was just part of the cover-up idea where they were trying to make him sound as if he's seeing things kind of thing, That's why Dahj isn't in the frame in those videos that we've seen. Maybe it was all just erased. Or maybe it was a problem with your brain, Picard, one of those kind of cover-up ideas.
Right.
But anyway, speaking of the Borg, Chris, your number one's about the Borg a bit.
Yes, the Borg Cube, the Romulan reclamation site or center. It seems to be a cross-species, not just Starfleet. It's across multiple kind of species, multiple races. It's a research piece. So Soji's working there officially. Mm-hmm. This is really interesting because what we find out is there's some previous Borg wandering around in the grain zone. The gray zone. They've been cut off from the collective. Mm-hmm. This is said by the Romulan overseer, kind of like one of the main guys who's talking to Soji and this other new doctor who has applied to get in multiple times. She was on her way there the last time and got turned around. So this seems to be like the ultimate research gig, to a degree.
Yeah.
So it all is above board. Where it seemed like in the first episode, this could have been slightly kind of below board, but like this was kind of like a black site.
Yeah.
This all seems proper research, above board. They're doing good things. They're reclaiming both the Borg cube, the technology, and the actual drones.
Yeah, kind of repatriating them. Yeah, it seems like it. I like that idea. Effectively, that's what happened with 7 of 9. A former Borg had the implants taken out of her, and she was allowed to return to human society. We've had other characters like that in the past as well. So now it looks like they've got a massive unit that are doing that. Really interesting. But I definitely like to point out, though, it does all seem above board, but they're very clear to point out, very secretive still, though. And this idea that there are some rogue Borgs, previous Borgs wandering around the grey zone, don't go in there or something bad might happen to you. That could be a very secretive way of dealing with certain things that they're investigating.
Yes, it's certainly above Borg.
I see what you did there.
It certainly is, yeah. And speaking of some cross-species work, we also had the relationship of Soji and of Narek is revealed as well in this episode.
Yes, a bit of Romulan nookie going on in the opening few moments of this episode. And of course, though, knowing then with Lieutenant Rizzo or Narissa, Narek's sister, that probably is not all that it seems, certainly not from Narek's point of view. I love that moment where Lieutenant Rizzo says to the Commodore that I've put my best man on the job, i.e. meaning her brother, and the Commodore going, yes, is he really your best man? He has, some fairly unusual methods. Again, actually, that whole conversation between the Commodore and Lieutenant Rizzo was quite nice.
It was,
as well. Where Rizzo goes, "Do you want me to take care of Picard?" And the Commodore goes, "No, you don't understand undercover. You don't have any patience." I thought that was quite, as a typical Vulcan, she was really measured and cutting in a logical way. It was really, really good.
Yeah, I even like that threat of torture from Rizzo, where she's saying, "I'll make him suffer as long as you want." I thought that was quite interesting. That seems very brutal of her. But yeah, definitely see more of that in the future. My final number one moment for this episode is just the end of episode introduction to Raffi Musiker. I really want to know more about this character. You only get her on screen for a couple of seconds at the end of the episode, but I just love the interaction between Picard and Raffi, where he arrives at her place in the space taxi, I guess, the new Uber, where it drops him off and disappears. He comes there with his bottle of wine and she turns him away instantly at gunpoint, saying, "There's absolutely nothing you can say that would convince me to speak to you again." He goes, "Romulan assassins are operating on Earth." And instantly she puts down the gun going, "Damn it, you know me too well."
And is that bottle of Picard 86?
Yeah, exactly. Really good.
Yeah, I like that little moment because it just shows you Raffi is going to be our little Han Solo for this show. I think it's get out of here. Oh, actually, this sounds like an interesting plan, an interesting mission. So I like that. Really nice introduction. We just know the character from the comic books, and we know that she's going to form a major part of the series anyway. So it's just nice to get that moment to see her at the start of this episode. So hopefully we'll see a lot more as the season goes on.
I'm hoping so too.
Yeah.
I really liked the introduction.
Definitely. Looking forward to seeing what Raffi comes up with moving forward. Good introduction. Great start.
On to any points or Easter eggs that we may have found in the episode.
Isn't there something else you have to do?
Yes, there is something else I'd have to do. I have two quick points. One is we see the original Enterprise, or I should say the original series Enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the TOS, the Kirk Enterprise.
There
There you go. That Enterprise, and then we also see Jean-Luc's, the original Next Generation Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no good with the numbering or anything. I know that from the look of them.
That's the 1701D is the one from Next Generation.
Yes.
But I love
There you go.
directly underneath that Enterprise I mentioned earlier on, but directly underneath that Enterprise, you have Picard asking for his credentials to the receptionist on the desk, who's going, "And who might you be?" with this massive
Exactly.
hologram directly over his head of the Enterprise that he flew for so many
that
years.
was mine.
That one there, that was me.
And then just a nice cut piece of, I don't know whether it's a deep cut or a piece of comedy or whatever, on the Borg cube when they have that kind of, all hands for the researchers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sign that says, "This facility has gone 5,843 days without an assimilation."
I really like that.
And I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Essentially, that was, I think it's like 15.9 years without an assimilation.
Interesting.
So is that when the Borg cube was destroyed? Maybe one of our listeners will know better, but yeah, it's 15.9. Is that back when the Borg cube was destroyed and data was destroyed on the Borg cube in Nemesis? I know, I'm assuming it's more than just a nice little fun joke in relation to kind of more than just like 0 days since someone's been assimilated. Cause if you're going to do that joke, you do like, it's been 0 days, you do, or 1 day since someone's been assimilated.
Yeah.
Kind of like The Simpsons, you put someone like up there, like scratching it out. That's the comedic part.
Yes, absolutely. I'm wondering, it takes place before the attack on Mars, definitely, which always makes me kind of wonder, was this connected? Is there something in between those?
Yeah, that's what I
potentially
would be thinking. Is it connected? Was this where the computer upload could be done? Because obviously the Borg always received a collective instruction at once. So yeah, that potential for connection with this reclamation site, the Borg cube, pretty interesting.
Yeah, genuinely, if we hadn't seen Narissa come and meet Narek on board that ship from Earth, from her meeting about Picard, I'd be wondering whether this was one of our time twisty things here where this whole reclamation of the Bork's was taking place 14 years ago, but it can't be that because of that, just purely because of those two characters interacting after meeting with Picard. So we know it wasn't that much of a time difference. So there you go.
I did my math wrong. It's 16 calendar years.
Oh, there you go.
So this is 2 years before Mars. So there's definitely going to be something.
Absolutely. I just had one Easter egg that I noticed, or one thing I wanted to call out. Maybe it's nothing at all, but I do like the fact there was an Ensign Clancy that was on board the Enterprise at one point. She was in the Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3, Episode 2. I just think it's interesting because it's entirely possible, given how much time has passed since Season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation, that Ensign has worked her way all the way through the ranks from engineer all the way to admiral and is now saying to Picard, I can't help you out. Get the hell out of here. I just think it'd be interesting if that was the same character. Played by a different actress. The character in the original show was played by Anne Ramsey, who was in the TV show Mad About You, if you recognize her. I just think it's quite interesting that may have brought back a character from the Next Generation that Picard might have actually known, and maybe she's become an admiral. Lots of mights and maybes in there, but that's my little connection or Easter egg that I think might be in there. John, anything that you noticed in the episode?
No, nothing more than what's been said. No.
Excellent. Well, the last thing we need to do then is, what did you think of Star Trek Picard Episode 2, Maps and Legends? Was it legendary? Was it mapped out to your liking? John?
Yes, it was. I really, really enjoyed this. Dare I say, I do defend it. But I would give this 4 out of control rogue replicators out of 5.
Nice.
I like the little kind of flashback to the, as I say, the genesis effectively of this, this whole mystery. I loved this Shadvash and the potential, the deep intrigue, the deep sort of infiltration that could be happening here with Starfleet, with the Federation. I loved the exchange between Admiral Clancy and Picard at Starfleet headquarters. There's this whole thing, building on about Dahj, about her 3 years. Was that indeed was she built by Bruce Maddox? He implanted that 3 years ago. Where is he? Is he being held by maybe the Chad Vash? What's happened to this Dr. Maddox? And again, seeing Lieutenant Rizzo effectively in disguise deep in the Starfleet command with the Vulcan Commodore, and then realizing that this Lieutenant Rizzo is in fact Narissa, the sister of Narek, and he is getting very close to Soji. Then again, it's a nice little nudge forward in this story. And then there is Raffi right at the end, and that just looks like it is going to be a wonderful relationship.
It'll be fun to watch.
It should be very fun to watch. So yes, I absolutely really again loved this episode and cannot wait for episode 3. Chris, what are your thoughts on Star Trek Picard episode 2?
I'm really still enjoying it. They've kept the pace up for a second episode, which is good. It's going to be interesting to see where they go with it. I'm hoping it's not just, it's going to be Picard chasing Soji or trying to find Soji up until the very last episode. And then on the last episode, he meets Soji and wait for season 2. I don't think they'll go down that route.
Is that because another show that we literally just covered ended that way, Chris?
Yes, pretty much. That's exactly why. I'm just like, I don't want you to do that to my
another series.
They're piquing a lot of questions for me, or they're piquing my interest, I should say, in a lot of kind of areas around this. So I'm interested to see where they go. I hope it does pick up slightly. In terms of pace. So we'll see how the next episode goes, but overall still enjoying it. But that's my thoughts. Derek, how are you finding episode 2 of Star Trek Picard?
Yeah, I'm loving the series so far. I'm really liking what they're bringing to Star Trek Picard and all the extra stuff we're learning. John's already mentioned all the brand new stuff we learned in this episode. And yeah, really intrigued to see what's happening and really interested to find out the real cause behind the Mars attack, and potentially the reclamation of what's going on in the Borg. You know, I want to see who's behind all of that. So, yeah, looking forward to episode 3. John, one last thing to do before we get out of here at the end of this episode. What is the pub quiz question for this week? We gave out our first pub quiz question on episode 1. Make sure you listen to that and send in your idea of what that is. We've got a couple of entries so far. But John, do you have a pub quiz question for this episode?
I do. Yes. Welcome to 10 Forward, fellow Trekkies. Hopefully you've got a Klingon speciality with the blood wine, or maybe a Klingon fire wine at your disposal to drink and get utterly sloshed in 10 Forward. But obviously we are doing our 10 Forward pub quiz. And so the question for this episode: how many days has the Romulan reclamation site gone without an assimilation? Nice. Answers on a postcard, as they used to say on Blue Peter. Or alternatively, you can send your answer to us at our email address. Just send it in to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. Remember, you can send your answers in either episode by episode or all in one go right at the end, or in 2 parts, however you want to do it. But please send it in to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. The person with the most correct answers at the end of the 10 episode season will be in for some Star Trek goodies. And of course, there will be no replicator to provide to you.
Yes, unfortunately, no replicators available yet. John, give them the question one last time.
Yes. How many days has the Romulan reclamation site gone without an assimilation?
And you should be able to find the answer to that just a little bit back in the podcast as well. Little pro tip for you there. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you stay subscribed to the podcast for the rest of the series. If you enjoy what you hear, why not share the podcast with your friends? Sharing the podcast is sharing the love for TV Podcast Industries. You can also support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. A huge thank you to all of our supporters over there, including Bob Phillips, Into the Night, A Moonlight Podcast, Steve Brown from Panels to Pixels, Amy Fitzgerald, Stuart Campbell, Oren Dix, Ken Hugh, and Claire Payne. Thank you so much for all your support. We've had a big month this month where we've had to go out and do a lot of expensive things for the podcast. So any support that you're providing to us over there has gone back into the podcast. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. It helps keep the lights on and the dilithium crystals charged.
Yes, thank you so much, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers, for your support on Patreon. And of course, you can support us by sharing the podcast as well. Subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite Federation or Romulan podcast catcher.
Absolutely. One final shout out and a huge thank you to Jason Caron over on the Walking Dead cast, who gave a shout out to the TV Podcast Industries podcast about Picard, and also to Brian Malosh and Ruthie over on the Talk Through Media podcast, where they're also discussing Picard as well. That's definitely the one to go to if you want someone that knows all about Star Trek. Brian and Ruthie's very in-depth podcast all about Star Trek Picard. Thanks so much, everybody, and bye-bye, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. Keep watching the stars.
Yes, we'll be back next week for Star Trek Picard Episode 3, The End is the Beginning.
Yes, thank you so much, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies, for joining us. It's a pleasure speaking with you. And of course, just to remind you, you are absolutely in great health as well. Mm-hmm. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, and engage. Bye.
And if you want to help with our dilithium drives and keeping the lights on, you feel free to pop on over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries, where you can support us at a single dollar, a single euro, whichever pound or federation money currency that you want. Be a bit Ferengi if you want on it, and the dollar always wins. No, I can see one of the hosts looking at me going, "Ooh, we're bringing in Ferengi. Don't do that. That's too much of a deep cut. DS9, no one will get it." Don't worry. Yes.
Quick aside, Chris. It was the only reason I was looking weird was because you said Ferengi, and I just thought that's not the pronunciation for that.
Because hey, look, they're Ferengi, gay, and it's everyone's happy as being a Ferengi.
Or in vernacular speak, Ferengi.
Yeah. Sorry. Where was I? Should I just start that again?
That would be awesome.
Okay.
The negative feedback that I think we've seen, at least, is referring to things like it being social justice warriors, all this kind of thing. And you're kind of going, well, okay, so be it. Probably not the show for you.
Absolutely. What a load of bollocks. Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Wait, I love that our producer's swearing. This is great. Ladies and gentlemen, the gates are open. Derek, how are you finding episode 2?
Loving it. Yeah, really enjoying this series so far. Loving the extra additions that have been added. How many redundant words can I put into a sentence?